Okay, so for this first podcast for week two, I want to just kind of summarize where we're at. So what had happened is, as you should know by now, de Vaca comes into Spanish Texas, although of course the Spanish had no conception of Texas at this point. But he washed ashore in Galveston Island. After many adventures, he ends up reunited with the Spanish, with the Spaniards. He goes and writes La Relation, which you have read for the first week. And then basically what happens is after that, the Texas disappears from the radar screen of the Spanish. And the reason for that is there's no mineral wealth in Texas to speak of. For instance, there were fortunes that the Spanish made in Mexico because of all the mineral wealth there. The Incas in Peru, tremendous amounts of mineral wealth there, gold and silver, mostly silver in Mexico. So the Spanish are making a fortune in what's now Mexico and Peru, but Texas just doesn't have it doesn't have that kind of mineral wealth in any way, shape, or form. So if it had, the story of history would have been quite different. The Spanish would have come here quite aggressively. They would have populated Texas, and this would probably still be part of Mexico to this very day. So it's one of those kind of quirks of history. So the Spanish ignore what we now call Texas pretty much for over 100 years. Now, the other reason the Spanish don't really aggressively come into the area that we now call Texas, the area north of the Rio Grande. Although, remember, the Rio Grande was not a border from the Spanish point of view, is that the native peoples up here, with the exception of the Caddo, were not good candidates for conversion to Christianity. Most were nomadic. They moved around for during the year. Um, they just were very difficult. They were tough fighters, and they just weren't seen as being worth the money that it would take to Christianize them. And the Caddo were the one group because they were sedentary, because they basically stayed in one place, because they had a fairly complex society, even though they were pretty diminished by 1492. The Caddo were pretty good candidates for Christianity, but they were just too far away from Mexico City. They were in what's now East Texas, Western Louisiana, Southwestern Arkansas. So basically, Texas drops from the, like I say, the Spanish ignore Texas for the most part. After de Vaca, after he reunites with the Spanish, goes back to Mexico City, the Spanish viceroy does send a large expedition into what's now the United States. That's under Coronado. And if any of you have served in the Navy, there's a Coronado Naval Air Station in San Diego. Coronado comes up, but mostly his expedition is in what we now call Arizona. He does pass through what is today North Texas. He's searching for gold. The Vaca comes back with these stories that he's heard from the natives that have followed him, that there is mineral wealth in the northern part of the Spanish possession of North America. So Coronado comes up into this area. He's very different from de Vaca. He's quite cruel. He shows no respect, really utter contempt for the native peoples he encounters, especially the Navajo and the Pueblo that he encounters in Arizona and New Mexico. And ultimately, his mission is a failure because there's not mineral wealth in this part of North America. So after Coronado, the Spanish just kind of check out of Texas. And they won't actually start focusing on Texas until the 1680s. And that's because they're afraid they're going to lose Texas. And that's where I'm going to begin the next podcast. So basically, what I want, the big points I want to get across in this quick intro podcast to week two is that after the Vaca, the Spanish did send a military expedition north, mostly into Arizona and New Mexico. It did cross deep North Texas, looking for mineral wealth. But it comes back and it reports to the Spanish, okay, look, there's no mineral wealth there. And on top of that, the native groups are not seen as being good candidates, in Texas especially. Now, in New Mexico, of course, you did have the Pueblo, and the Spanish do come in and are very aggressive about settling New Mexico, especially Santa Fe. So New Mexico is settled by the Spanish much earlier than is Texas. And that's because the native groups in what is now New Mexico were much better candidates for conversion to Christianity, especially the Pueblo Indians. But in Texas, there's no kind of civilization that's easily accessible to the Spanish, and the Spanish ignore Texas. Again, no mineral wealth. The native groups are not seen as good candidates for conversion. And between basically the 1550s and the 1680s, the Spanish basically, for over a century, the Spanish basically ignore Texas. And as I'll talk about in the following podcast, they don't start paying attention to Texas until they feel threatened. They feel like Texas might be stolen from them by their enemies in North America, the French.